How's it, guys? I'm Nazarbro, and do you like elves? Yeah, you like elves. You play WoW after all, and we have a whole lot of them. We even have an elf expansion in the not-so-distant future. Well, say hello to your new playable sort of elf race, the Harronir. Except they haven't been confirmed as playable yet, have they? Who's to say they will be playable? Well, everyone, I guess. From the moment these not-quite elves, not-quite trolls appeared in the data mining, the entire WoW community pretty much unanimously decided that these guys will be playable. Not even just speculating on whether or not they will be, just straight up, wow, these guys look cool. I can't wait to play as them in a few patches in the War Within. Even when allied races were introduced in late Legion and opened the biggest can of allied worms that rode all the way through BFA, I don't think we've quite seen a decisively unanimous agreement that a race absolutely will be playable, except maybe Volpira. So I wanted to go over the Harronir and everything we know about them so far, which admittedly isn't a whole lot at this point. Then also take a look back at the racial ride we've had since the allied race system changed how we think about races in World of Warcraft forever. Alright, let's take a look at the Harronir first, of course. I do need to give Wowhead props for their dressing room tool that allows you to mess with customization options for not just player races, but also races that aren't playable, like the Harronir, making it very fun to take a look. So who are these guys anyway? Well, even though they've appeared in the data mining quite extensively, and showed up briefly in the release date announcement trailer, they actually still remain quite a mystery. On the surface, they appear to be like a subterranean elf species. Yeah, that's right, more elves, because I know you love elves, as they seem to share the night elf model skeleton and animations. However, they also seem to share some characteristics with trolls, mostly being the fact that they can have tusks. So, are they somewhere between a troll and an elf? Maybe. That is one of the more popular theories, and it does make a decent amount of sense. But these underground elves also have some features that are a bit more unique. The most obvious example would be the fact that they can have freaking quills. Yeah, straight up porcupine mode. Or quillbore? Both quillbore and Harronir seem to be big root enjoyers. Perhaps there's some kind of connection there? They can also be covered with body and face fur and have some very bat-like ears to match. Basically, the Harronir spectrum can be taken to two different extremes. Another flavor of elf, or something far more animalistic and interesting. So customization-wise, they've got some neat things that would be cool as something playable. But would they actually want to join us? And if so, who would they join? Well, at this point it's hard to say. I am going to discuss some environmental spoilers in a bit, so if you want to go into the War Within knowing as little as possible about the zones, now is your chance to click off. And now, without getting too spoilery about the story, suffice it to say that they show up very briefly in the available War Within campaign at launch. And their appearance in what has been played on the beta does not answer many questions. Speaking from a lore perspective, most of the discussion has centered around them potentially being the missing link between elves and trolls. Yeah, that's right, if you didn't already know, elves are an evolutionary offshoot of trolls. Brief lore dump. The first elves on Azeroth were, of course, the Night Elves, which actually originated as trolls. Back when trolls ruled the ancient world, a tribe of them called the Dark Trolls settled around the Well of Eternity. Over time, the magic seeping out of the well changed the Dark Trolls, altering them physically into what we know now as the Night Elves. So this idea of the Harronir being the missing link between trolls and elves does have some sort of root. Root. In the established canon. It could be that some of the proto-Night Elves left the main group around the well sometime mid-evolution, if that makes sense, and over time found their way to what would eventually become the Isle of Dorn, unless it was already called that by that time. Without the close proximity of the well, maybe the evolution halted for them, or at least slowed down. This theory does have some holes though. Specifically, holes created by those quills. Where did the quills come from? As far as we know, no trolls had quills to start, and most tribes seem to be biologically identical to each other for the most part. It wouldn't make complete sense for the quills to appear mid-evolution and then disappear by the time the Dark Trolls became something resembling the Night Elves. Alright, this is where those environmental spoilers I was going to talk about come in, because there are some interesting circumstances regarding the environment surrounding the Harronir. Around their camp, you can see these absolutely gargantuan roots all over. Alongside the roots, the whole immediate area is absolutely sprawling with a whole lot of life. The current prevailing theory is that these roots belonged to Harronir, the first world tree on Azeroth mentioned in a book that can be found in the central encampment in the Emerald Dream. You can go and read this right now in the live game. In short, the Titan Aeonar planted the tree using a branch of Harronir, the mother tree, that was gifted to her by Elune herself. The tree began to take root, but was then torn out by Aman'Thul, who was not happy with its planting in the first place, saying that life was chaos and couldn't be controlled. He wasn't very thorough though, as the roots of Harronir were left behind. Knowing this, assuming the big roots around the Harronir camp are indeed the remnants of Harronir is probably pretty reasonable. But what does this have to do with the Harronir in the first place? Well, we already know that in the Warcraft universe, different types of magic can alter the physical form of beings that stick around long enough. The Night Elves are the prime example, as well as Sargeras himself with the Fel. Well, what if the Harronir are an evolved group of trolls that were steered towards this form because of the surrounding life energy, instead of the arcane from the well? It could be a combination of both theories: proto-elves that left the well group sometime mid-evolution and then arrived at the roots to be affected by them. I think this is the most likely of the potential scenarios. To be clear, I'm not the first to present this idea either. I know some other creators have thought about it before me. We can't all have a crack team like Belilar, can we? Regardless of where they came from and how they got here though, if or when they are made playable, who would they join? I would say currently the most likely candidate would be both factions, since the Earthen are also both. I don't think Blizz will ever try to make an allied race for a single faction without also introducing another at the same time to balance things. So if the Harronir become playable in the War Within, it would probably be another dual faction allied race, unless Blizz introduced another allied race in 11.1 or 11.2 or something to balance it out. And no, I don't think the Arathi are in this race. Ha! Race. At least not yet. Now as for when, if they were another dual faction allied race, I would say probably the period of downtime at the end of War Within and before midnight. This is all dependent on how the patch campaigns shake things up, of course. So if they are added as a race for both factions in the War Within, that's my top guess. Notice I said in the War Within. If Blizz waited a little bit longer, there is a perfect slot for the Harronir to be added as a single faction race with a potential counterpart. We will need to fast forward a bit to midnight. Midnight is the ultimate elf expansion, and I know you love elves, with Chris Metzen describing it as a story that unifies the elven tribes of Azeroth. With the impending Void invasion of the Sunwell, if the Harronir consider themselves among the elven tribes that Chris mentions, they could fit nicely as the newest elf on the block, and in my opinion, probably fit in better as a horde race. So who would the Alliance get as their allied race at the same time? Well, probably the long-awaited Alliance-aligned High Elves. The good old High Elf debate is as old as the allied race system itself. No, scratch that. As old as the game itself, probably. I've been an advocate for them since the birth of the allied race system. And my main character right now is a Void Elf because it's the closest thing we have to High Elves in the Alliance so far. Now I know at this point the High Elf movement has worn down on some people, and the attitude has shifted to just play Blood Elves or play Void Elves. But no, I want to play as a Warcraft 3 Silver Covenant aligned Alliance High Elf. I always have, but I have made do with the Void Elves in the interim at this point. In my opinion, Midnight is actually the perfect time to add them in, especially as a counter to the Harronir. I would honestly prefer if they got a different model too, just to differentiate them from Void Elves and Blood Elves. High Elves are and always have been my #1 allied race pick, besides Sethrak. They did get pretty shafted, and I'm sure that Blizz can make them work just fine. In short, Harronir for the Horde, High Elves for the Alliance at midnight. Let's make it happen, Blizz. The Harronir are obviously important for what is to come. Blizz put them in the release date trailer for a reason. And honestly, I don't expect the High Elves to become playable, unfortunately, because Blizz hates them. Blizz, please. But we'll see when Blizz gives us our new Bat Elves. My official guess is either in the lull between War Within and Midnight, or to be introduced alongside something else in Midnight proper, whether it's Alliance High Elves or not. So Harronir discussion done. The video is over, right? Not quite. Before I leave you today, I did just want to go back and take a look at the allied race system as a whole, and what other races that we already know about we could potentially see one day. Before allied races was a household term. Huh? Before allied races was a household term in the hearts and minds of Warcraft fans, people threw the concept of sub-races around. The biggest examples were things like Magyar orcs, the other dwarf clans, troll tribes. I'm pretty sure there was a whole lot of Zandalari discussion around MoP at the time, as well as the fan-favorite undead elf to be an actual Dark Ranger. Then BFA was revealed, and everything changed. The first batch of 4 all made a great deal of sense, except for Void Elves. And yeah, there was some grumbling about Nightborne joining the Horde because Tyrande was mean. I did some minor grumbling myself, I admit. But I do play both factions, so I got over it eventually, and I guess it worked out nicely in the end. Then BFA gave us the really good ones. Magyar orcs and Dark Iron dwarves have been requested for years. The fact that you are always an alternate universe Magyar orc instead of a normal timeline Outland Magyar orc is a bit weird, but they look real nice, so it's all good, I guess. Dark Irons are Dark Irons. Hair is on fire, all is good. Then the Kultirans and the Zandalari trolls, which are pretty sweet. I know there are many that wish you could make a Kultiran human using the original human body types, and it is definitely a damn shame that you can't. Ideally, I think Kultirans and Stormwind humans should get a choice between both body types, since they're all just humans. Maybe even the Gilneans in their human form. Now, the Zandalari are really damn sweet. I don't know how many of you remember the absolute shitstorm of capital D discourse that erupted when their dinosaur druid forms got data mined. It wasn't until sometime afterwards that the Kultiran druid forms were data mined to balance them out, but even then, there was still a big discussion about horde bias for allied races. The last batch of allied races we ever saw, until now with the Earthen, were of course the Volpira, and their obvious counterpart in every way, the Mechanomes. Obviously the Mechanomes, who else could you possibly be thinking about? Yeah, it's unfortunate. I know beast or animalistic races aren't for everyone, but I for one was disappointed we never got Sethrak. But I'm probably a bit biased. Whenever I play an Elder Scrolls game, I almost always play Argonians. There was a whole lot of work put into them too, and even some evidence that they were being primed as an allied race. But I guess Blizz didn't get as strong of a reaction from them as they hoped. At least nowhere near Volpira, but then nothing has come near Volpira except for the Harronir. Maybe there was a lot of work needed to be done for the Sethrak to kit them out with the ability to equip all armor, and Blizz decided it just wasn't worth it. In my opinion, Sethrak are the one single allied race candidate standout that I thought was an obvious and great pick that never got realized. Also, High Elves, obviously. I will die on this hill. There were a whole lot of other options that people kept throwing around when the concept was still fresh and hot too. Naga, Jinyu, Gilblin, Vrykul, Naga, Tortolin, Sandlane, and Cohen, Naga, Night Elf Worgen, Tuskar, Saberon, and of course, Naga. Seriously, the Naga have quite a cult following hoping for them to be playable. If we're talking serpent people, I would rather have the Sethrak, but I will concede that Naga are definitely way more important to the lore. Since they are also former Night Elves, there has been some talk once again for them to show up as playable in Midnight, since they kind of count as one of those elven tribes Chris was talking about. Maybe, if you squint a little. In terms of more traditional additions of new races, of course we did just get the Drakthir, who definitely are not for everybody, but I do enjoy them myself. I do wish they weren't so sleek though. If I could beef mine out a bit more, I would be more satisfied. More importantly, their introduction has reaffirmed the fact that Blizz can and will still make regular races that aren't allied races, which is also a good thing. I love the allied race system, but I do love the regular races too. The starting instances they always get are always a treat to play through, although at this point, the line between new race and new class has blurred a bit, with Demon Hunters and now Evokers. More recently, the Drakthir starting instance is really fun, and I like their lore a whole lot. Allied races skip all that, which is fine since the bulk of their story generally happens in the campaigns they're related to, but I do wish their recruitment scenarios could at least be replayed. Anyways, that's enough rambling from me about the Harronir and allied races as a whole. So, to recap, Harronir are almost definitely a when rather than an if, and I'm looking forward to learning more about them. Other than them, my top picks for the older races to somehow be introduced as allied races are definitely Sethrak and Alliance High Elves. Making Sethrak relevant again will definitely take some work and will probably be a challenge, unfortunately, but I do hope Blizz considers it. High Elves will soon literally be the most relevant they have ever been, with Midnight coming out in 2-ish years. So this may be the only time to introduce them and make complete sense. We'll see what Blizz decides. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you made it to the end, please let me know in the comments what race you would love to see as playable, even the really out there ones. I know I listed some of the more popular races earlier in the video, but if there are some crazy ones you think would be cool, I want to hear it. Other than that, please consider leaving a like if you enjoy how I do things here, and subscribing would mean the world to me. Until next time, stay safe, friends.